To lead the conversation on the best practices of fundraising in these challenging times is none other than serial entrepreneur and active angel investor Will Sterlich. I hope I'm saying your name right. A venture fellow at US-based NFX, a venture firm focused on pre-seed and seed startups. He will be joined by Masha Boucher, I think, founder of Day One Ventures, an early-stage VC that's pioneering a new model of VC by spearheading PR for its portfolio companies, and by François-Xavier Coupet, co-founder of French First Bridge Ventures, a platform designed to connect the Asian and European tech ecosystems. Join us. Please welcome them to the stage with a warm welcome.
Thank you. Oh, wow, that works very easily. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's the last panel of an exhaustive period. Slight technical difficulties. Really quickly, I'm Will. I work with a fund called NFX. It's based in Silicon Valley. There's an office in London as well. It's the world's largest dedicated seed fund with $450 million in the last fund, and primarily does investments in Silicon Valley, New York, London, Europe, broadly out of London, and Israel. I'll leave it to FX to introduce himself, and then Masha.
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. So I'm coming today from Paris, where I'm running an investment firm called First Bridge Ventures, focused on growth stages, investing in technology companies, helping European ones to scale in Asia and the Middle East mostly. It's a great pleasure to be here with you guys today. And Masha, would you like to say a few words?
Nice to be here. Thank you for having us. I run Day One Ventures. It's an early stage venture capital firm, early investor in companies like Remote, Truebill, WorldCoin. We invest in early stage company and spearhead their communications as a value add to the companies. We primarily invest in US, about around like 15-20% of companies we backed comes from Europe and outside of US.
Great. So when Vlad approached me, I met Vlad 6-7 years ago when I worked at a firm called Social Capital. We were trying to use data we were Silicon Valley based. We were trying to use data to invest in companies around the world. And I had the fun task of looking at companies around the world. Met Vlad. He told us about what was happening in Romania, and we were excited. Ultimately, didn't do any. We did a French company, a few in the UK, never got to Eastern Europe. And personally, since in my time at NFX, I've been focused on the US. So I figured I'd pull in two of my good friends who actually have done investing in Europe and ask them some questions. And so just to start, Masha, you actually grew up in Europe.
Exactly, yeah.
And then moved to Silicon Valley. FX, you are French, but spent time in the US. When you talk about global international expansion, do you think coming off of the Israel chat we just had, it's necessary to open up an office where you're expanding internationally? And is that the first step, or are there steps people should take before that?
I'd like to say that very successful, I was lucky enough to invest in 8 unicorns in the early stages, and I like to say that every unicorn is anomaly, and I think every big company that's being created, it's like their own way and their own path. I don't think it's absolutely necessarily to be headquartered in US. While we do have a lot of successful companies that started in US, companies like WorldCoin that started in San Francisco, and companies like Truebill that started outside of the Bay Area. We also have, for example, the most successful company in Fund 2 portfolio called Remote.com. They allow you to hire people outside of your country without dealing with local regulations, compliance, finances. And companies hit $3 billion valuation in just 3 years after they started. They have low hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So 2 founders, one founder is based in Amsterdam and another founder is based in Lisbon. Companies right now with 1,000 employees based remote, I believe more than 80 countries or even more than that. And this company is majorly successful, backed one of the best VCs besides Day One, Index, Sequoia, Excel, and they never had to establish headquarters anywhere in US or outside of the US. So I don't think there is like any single rule, and I think as we see right now, the world gets more decentralized, and there is like also advantage of being in a remote place and having less competition for the talent you employ.
I think it's interesting. Like again, as you were saying, I think every company have a different path. What we've seen and has been quite interesting is like, especially if you want to go to different, I would say, different geographies that are culturally extremely different, especially when we bring companies to Asia, where the market is very, very different. You do not necessarily need to have a headquarter over there or an office or whatever, but you need to have a strong understanding of what the market looks like. And it's really, really hard to do it from your home base. So I would say we did a lot of expansion with our companies across Europe. So French companies going to Spain, Spanish companies going to France, the UK, Germany, whatever. You usually have some sense of understanding of what the market needs over there from your home base. Definitely, I highly recommend, and all our companies have done it, to recruit a local team, a country manager. I don't know if it's specifically like, you know, some kind of like headquarter, but some form of like representation. When you're trying to go somewhere like China or the Middle East, or Asia in general, you absolutely need to have like a very strong tie to the culture and understand what they're expecting from it. And that usually requires help towards developing a product that is, you know, addressing specifically the needs of your new market, that has strong understanding of the business cultural ties. Usually you need to have like, I don't say sponsors, but like strong partnership in the region to help you to do it, and definitely having some form of team that helps you to like go through issues such as regulations, which are very, very different, way of doing business, obviously, and commercialization and marketing, as we've seen like 2 talks before this one, especially when you go to Asia, the way companies communicate and push information to the consumers is very different. So it's all intertwined. There's no some kind of like secret sauce or like magical recipe that helps you to go there, but definitely getting as close to your customers is a big way of helping.
And as investors, you're in this interesting position where people are coming to you and sort of often saying, give me $1 million, give me $10 million, I'm going to go use that money to expand internationally. Is that the conversation that often happens, or do you often go to these founders and say, let us invest in you and we'll take you internationally? And I guess some context, do you want to share how First Bridge is unique?
Yeah, okay.
Value is going international?
Of course. So we're really, really focused on global expansion. The reason I started the fund was because I've seen too many European companies focusing on being, you know, very local and failing to become global players. The idea was really to help them to use our network in those regions to go and scale over there. Especially, we believe that Asia. We started the fund in 2019. It was a different time, of course, but still, it's still quite relevant today. And at the time, Asia was the biggest and fastest growing market by far, and European companies were not getting in touch enough with that region in the world. Obviously, the classic expansion is going to neighboring European countries and then maybe to the US, but no one was considering those huge markets on the east. So when we started, it was really, really trying to help them to scale in that sense. And we're helping them with like recruiting teams, developing products, negotiating with regulators, expansion, and so on. We did it with all over Asia, but we did especially very well with an Israeli company of ours called eToro. There's a few other examples that we've worked closely with. I would say, again, it's really, really different from one to another one. Like there's not a unique answer to it, but it's definitely you have to go to them at first with a specific idea of how you can help them to grow, but they also need to have a strong understanding of how to get there and a desire to go. You don't just go to a founder and say, your product is amazing. I can see it in Beijing or in Korea or whatever. You have to buy the vision of them going to that region, but they need to be the one, you know, kind of carrying it. And you cannot run the company instead of the founder. So you help, but you're not doing. And that's something that as investors, you really, really need to integrate and accept.
Masha, I'm curious from your perspective,
there are like
especially
3 types of companies. If we speak about companies going international, I think first type of companies, there are like lots of companies that started in a small country and they achieved a lot of success and they want to go internationally. I haven't seen so much success of if they started with a small country somewhere in Europe and they want to go to broader market. I haven't seen too many stories of success. And if companies started in a country, succeeded in a local market, want to go abroad, we would probably not back this company. There is like second type of companies that's from scratch international. For example, I used to work I was vice president at cybersecurity company Acronis, which is 3.5 billion in value, backed by BlackRock, Goldman, and a bunch of VCs. And this company been created from the first year, they were in 3 continents. They have 33 offices all over the world, and this country and this company was international from scratch. For example, they also international, different offices that were international. I was recently speaking with a person who works for the Singaporean office, and they say we have 80 nationalities in Singaporean office. So companies like that, they designed to be international, and it's just a part of their DNA, and I think there is a lot of strengths because they could just rely and pick the best countries. It's also much easier for this country to expect in new countries because they sort of learned playbook, how to do it, and there is a lot of resilience because if economy in one country is falling, in other countries it's more stable, and they can a lot leverage the changes in economic situation. I think these companies are great, but I don't think putting together a company like that requires specific mentality of the founder, and I don't think it's also for everyone. And the first scenario, I worked in the past with companies like House and Hotel Tonight, and while we were supporting them in the United States, at some point they said, we want to go abroad, and usually this point is Series B or Series C, and they usually start not with like 1 more countries, but with a few countries at the same time. And I think investors do buy the vision, but I think the main questions that founders should answer, like, do they go in other countries because the market in where they're at already fulfilled, right? Have they already became one of the market leaders? Because I think sometimes it happens that a company want to go elsewhere because they're not succeeding locally. And I do think if they haven't succeeded locally, and especially if they haven't found product market fit locally, they shouldn't be thinking about the other geographies. It feels like a very dangerous path. I think first thing should happen is just achieving product market fit, getting into one of the top positions in their first market, and then expanding globally.
So I guess very tactically for Romanian entrepreneurs who might be here, you're talking about small market, it's hard to go international from your home base. So it sounds like your advice then is to be international from day one.
I think
how is remote work
it
playing
really
into
depends
that?
on what you're trying to build. I think being like, for example, transportation company or like search company or SaaS companies that's focused and that's really knows very well the home-based customers. For example, part-time I spend in Switzerland, and we have a lot of exciting companies that's kind of like TaskRabbit for Switzerland or DoorDash for Switzerland, and they try to get to Germany, but they're not accomplishing it. And that's what usually happening. Companies from bigger countries come and occupy local markets much faster just because they have more power. I think building company is not always like shooting for the highest returns. I think it's very often just sincere desire of particular founders to fulfill needs of the customers, but they have, yes, it could still be good business, but I think if you want to build really big scalable business, you might not start with many markets, but you have to start with a bigger market. If it comes to Europe, you have to start with like French market, German market, UK market that has, if it's consumer company, dozens of millions of users potentially as you grow. And starting with like more sophisticated market where you have bigger number of consumers, and then expanding in smaller markets. And also like when you start with bigger markets, for example, you start with US adoption, and other markets which are very often less sophisticated, less competitive, gets much easier.
I know a mutual friend of ours in your portfolio, you have a few Eastern European founders that came to Silicon Valley sort of with your help and day one became investors. Is that sort of, I guess it seems like maybe there's 2 paths if you're a Romanian entrepreneur in day one world, is sort of move somewhere bigger, hire a remote team that you can leverage and take advantage of international, or 3, sort of stay local and pray?
I think it's all about like ambition of the founder. If you're optimizing to build some really big company that's like really impactful, of course you should go in competitive market and maybe struggle for a period of time with adoption, having like less connections than your competitors, but on the same time being able to build something bigger. I think we like it to back, I believe we backed founders that's at least like half of our portfolio founders which are immigrants in the first generation. And they probably came from 40 to 50 different countries. So it's a very diverse network. We never really pay attention on like where the founder came from. We very often start working together and start partnering before like even knowing where the person came from. I think talent and just like entrepreneurship is like very international. I don't think you defined by like place you came from. But of course, there are like certain hubs that shape this talent in a much better way. And I feel like everyone, even like medium talents that came to San Francisco and survived in San Francisco for like 3 years, being able to network, being able to pay rent, being able to compete, being able to work one of the companies there, gets much more qualified and much more capable to build new tech company, just because they can assemble lots of tech practice as well as like break through lots of competition, which in the first stage it just has to do just with natural survival. But I do think talent is international, and I do think if you like young and have big ambition, I do think it's extremely helpful to come to one of the tech hubs and one of the centers to learn the best practices and surround yourself with people who already achieved success in your field.
We heard earlier today about remote work and how to manage a remote team. As an investor, you were talking about remote.com being a huge success in your portfolio, entirely remote workforce. Do you have concerns when two founders come to you and say, we don't even live in the same city?
We've never been concerned about it. I feel like with remote work and lots of things in tech connected with fashion. Like 2 years ago, we hated AR. Right now, AR is very popular. Like 1 year ago, like year and a half ago, crypto was popular. It's not popular anymore, and then it would be another cycle when it gets popular. So it was like with remote work, it was always like tendency. Oh wow, remote work is amazing. No one ever going to rent office again. Oh, remote teams are always losing, right? And I think like a year and a half ago, I remember like Silicon Valley Twitter was like actively discussing 4 days work week. Who's thinking about like 4 days work week right now? I think lots of things just come with trends. I think you should be like honest with who you are and what fits you best. I think we will see extremely successful companies that's like both remote and not remote. I don't think remote is the only way. I don't also think the founder should be based, but I do think there are lots of tips, and I do think that teams should be seeing each other a lot. For example, my team is based between San Francisco, Texas, LA, New York, London, and we get together at least once a quarter for like 3-4 days when we discuss some most important things and network and simply get to know each other. I think if team doesn't have a physical point of contact in the company and hasn't created some personal relationship and sympathy and hasn't shared about things outside of work, I think this team has a very, very high low retention rate. So because it would be very easy for people to quit the job and get some another offer if it's as easy as just logging off the Slack. But if they had shared regular experiences that they co-created together on a regular basis, and I think virtually offsite is one of the best way to do this. I do think this team is just more capable to stay together for a long time, which is probably one of the necessary things for a big company to succeed, just having like a stable team working together closely for many years.
I think it really depends. All right, so again, it's really hard to find a solution that works for all the team and all the companies. Depends on your business model, obviously, but if you get into remote working, I think it's extremely dangerous for some teams. And we've seen some company completely collapsed because of that, like to the point I was not expecting it to happen, but we were all learning on the job. You know, when COVID happened, it really changed the structures, and some of the founders just were not communicating properly with their team anymore. They lost touch with the goal, with the mission, with whatever. Others did very well. So I really think it depends. Obviously, you know, when you start to have different offices, presence in different countries, you need to create this culture of communicating throughout the different places in the world and being efficient at that. I'm thinking of some of our large companies that have offices in 5, 6, 7, 20 countries. These guys need to be communicated with all the countries efficiently, and every kind of like country manager is responsible of like protecting the culture within the office and like making sure everyone feels, you know, empowered by the mission or whatever. So I would say it really depends. Definitely the same way we've observed in the US, big firms. In Europe, we've seen, especially in our companies, a lot of companies are just killing remote work, or like at least reducing it drastically. And we've seen a high increase of efficiency of workers usually when you do that. But on the other end, you've seen counterexample of very successful companies. We're very close to a company called Deal that is promoting remote work and helping people to recruit all over the world. These guys have been one of the fastest growing companies in the US. and they never ever had an office. They've always been remote. And so again, I think it's different. You just have to be very quick at adapting to the challenges that you have to face, and adapting again to the unique culture of the company.
And when you're considering sort of one of these companies to bring them international, bring them to Asia, the Middle East, maybe Israel, are there specific signals you look for? You're investing at a later stage in Masha. Like, when is a company ready to go?
It's really hard to say. I would say, first of all...
Okay, come on. You make calls every day.
Yeah, no, again, you're right. Okay, so let's put it this way. I think you don't go international once you've killed it on your domestic market.
You don't.
You don't. You focus first on your domestic market. You show that you can create a lot of value, your product is amazing.
Do you recommend going pan-Europe before?
No. I think it really depends again. Some companies can go and should go straight to Asia. Some should go straight to the Middle East. Some could go to the US. And we've seen it with some of our portfolio companies. It really depends on the industry, B2C, B2B, and so on. Of course, it's a natural reflex when you're a Western European company to go to the other Western countries. Because obviously you just see them as easier. It's closer, culturally it's like easy to understand. You can take a bit of a risk, but usually what we've observed is like the easy way, which is going to Spain, usually for French companies, for example, is actually quite hard. You get there, it's still a different business culture, purchasing power, pricing point is kind of different, the need can be kind of different. So you still need a lot of effort, and the reward is not always the best one. Sometimes it's better to go to a more challenging country, but at least if you crack it, you're going to make a really, really good return on that investment. So it really depends on which type of companies. Now, the usual time when you should go abroad is not too late. So usually you try to go post-Series B, I would say, or sometimes post-Series A, depending. But you should try to look for international expansion quite quickly, because otherwise you tend to become a very domestic firm, and then the options for exits became quite restricted. Obviously, if you're just buying a company that is very good in one specific country, you're not going to pay an insane multiple on that. You're going to be closer to some kind of like ceiling of growth. So
it's kind of interesting because Masha earlier was saying there's a lot of companies that are found in smaller countries that then have to compete with foreign, like outside companies coming in. But I think there's a pretty decent precedent, especially with like a company like Uber going into a market and buying the local competition rather than fighting for it. And so you think it's better? Yeah.
I mean, it depends. First of all, Uber was a US company, so they grew in the US. They had lots of cash, and then.
But Uber came as a US company and acquired international companies.
Yeah, they did that a lot. It's harder to do it when you're coming from a smaller country.
You're saying you shouldn't build for that eventuality.
I mean, yeah.
Going international de-risks your exit.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, for sure. And then also, I think Masha was making a very interesting point. When you're coming from very, I would say, smaller countries, where the market is quite small, at first you have to think internationally. When you go, I always think of that example, but if you go to Estonia, they had amazing companies, number of unicorns per inhabitants, it's insane. And these guys, when they design company, think straight away for like international developments, because their local market is way too small. When you're in like France, Germany, I would say, or the UK, you tend to have a big enough market to make it domestically, but definitely not big enough to like scale it internationally and make it. Not big enough to make it like absolutely massive. So you have to think internationally, and it's not easy to do so. So there's usually this timing between Series A to Series C when you definitely need to start thinking of international expansion.
Masha, keep going back to remote because I think it's so interesting. But you said international from day one. How does that actually happen? Like the two founders were in different countries, different cities. They just started selling across the world?
I can give an example of, companies that I worked for, Acronis. I think what happened is they started doing sales in all of these countries, right? And R&D can be based in one of these countries, but you start acquiring customers. So very consciously, they did do backup and data protection. So they very consciously chose US, and then they chose Germany, where there is a lot of demand for backup and solutions like that based on mentality, based on just like the way how customers think, right? And then they went to Japan, where also like high requirements to the quality, and they have superior technology, and it just found lots of success there. So it doesn't mean you should go in like 10 countries, but you can think about where your product would be most accepted and start developing like sales and marketing in these places, right? And keep measuring like which countries would potentially have the highest demand on product like yours, and keep going in these markets. I think what's interesting is you always try to get to the markets with the most sophisticated and most spoiled consumer base. I think that's why most of American companies expanding so well outside of US, because US users are some of the most like spoiled users when it comes to consumer product for sure, and same like about most of B2B product, because they have so many companies competing. So if you overcome competition and won the heart of American customer, there is a better chance you're going to win the heart of someone on another market, which simply has much less requirements to the quality of the product, to the quality of customer support, to the quality of the marketing. So I think you start with market where your product can find the best like product consumer match, where the audience is the most sophisticated, and then this audience like and customer naturally makes you better, and then you're easily equipped to expand in less sophisticated markets.
I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, so I'll ask one more question, and hopefully you all can get your questions warm. Otherwise, I have questions for hours. But what are sort of your favorite stories or moments that you've had as investors of like someone tried to go international and it worked? And like, what do you think uniquely made that sort of magic happen?
It did work, or
It did work.
It did work.
Yeah, we're going for optimism.
Great, perfect.
We're venture capitalists. We invest in what we believe in the future. Yeah.
To us, the one that was very, very interesting, it's like, I'm not going to go for the classic, very big one that did great at expanding in all the different territories now. I would say one of our smaller companies is like probably the one we invested the earliest. It was a kind of a late Series A, and we usually don't invest before Series B. But these guys were trying to go international. They had an amazing product domestically. They were, growing super, super fast. One of the fastest growing company in France. But they were, kind of like missing it in terms of going, and they wanted to go to the UK specifically. And the UK was the main country they would, kind of like failing to acquire properly. And they spent a lot of time working there, and we were helping them, going to London with them, trying to meet the right people. And finally, we discovered in the specific aspects of what they were doing, the main issue was that the country manager that they were trying to recruit didn't have the exact profile that would be matching local demands. And as soon as we understood that, we completely changed the way we recruited him. And when we found the right guy, all of a sudden, the product market fit was instant. And the company started to grow, and the UK became like the fastest growing market within their portfolio by far, in front of like what historically has been the second and third best market, which was Spain and Germany. And all of a sudden, the UK was taking off. So I would say in terms of like international expansion, that was very interesting, because we had this formula that has been working in the past for other countries, and we had failed to like replicate it in the specific key sector. And I would say that was a very interesting lesson for us, and we were quite excited about it.
Great.
I think the most interesting story I have, not from portfolio, but from one company I used to work with, and my specialty is in marketing and communications. And I did support a company called Get, or in the past Get Taxi, was in all the countries that this company been operating. So they get to decent success in Israel. And after that, they went to UK and they went to US. And I remember it was quite early. It was like 2013. So it was really hard to imagine companies that's like in the city was like, they went to New York to begin with. It was really hard to imagine that companies that's just been like city full of yellow taxis and then some sort of app functioning. The first question wasn't like, how do you compete with Uber? The first question was like, why do I use my phone if I could just hail yellow taxi, right? And they managed to overcome, and I think they had a big splash, and they had lots of early success. I think they're very innovative in terms of representing like some different ways to incentivize customers. For example, they launched like I think $10 per ride get pool and just like things like that, and just like trying to optimize with the needs that would be like like very relevant for local customers and expanding a lot. But at the end of the day, I don't think it worked out. So they acquired another company called June, and they refocused into B2B. So they started selling their like B2B software for other companies like Lyft, so they can serve to the corporate orders. And I think it was exactly the case when very, very smart team from Israel that achieved a lot of success on local market, as well as managed to achieve a lot of success in London. They couldn't really get into US market, where simply like their biggest competitor, Uber, had so much more resources and so much more power, so much more lobbying abilities, and most importantly, so much more ability to recruit the best drivers, right? Because I think when you work on like with on-demand economy, and it's much easier for you to absorb the workers and someone like who's going to provide the service simply because you're local and simply because you better understand mentality, and just simple people using your platform to make a living, they would feel much more comfortable with someone like who knows local tradition. And so it was a key case when they probably shouldn't have gone there, and it's probably like been one of the biggest distractions. They had a lot of really bright marketing campaigns. It didn't start as a failure, but it ended up being not successful. And if you look back, you could probably think about, well, they might have tapped into some market which never had any ride-sharing apps yet, because they almost started at the same time as Uber, but instead they breakthrough. I think part of the motivation was just to be in front of investors who would start using app as a customers and ended up investing in the app. And I just think this motivation hasn't been like the best, and it's one of the learnings from there.
Awesome. Do we have any questions? Please.
Yeah, thank you. Very good insight. Thank you very much. My name is Lucian. I want to ask you, in your opinion, of course it's subjective probably, when is the right time to get your first round as a startup? Maybe you can dive into the most 3 significant things you are looking at.
To repeat the question, when is the right time to raise your first amount
first
of venture capital, friends and family?
No. First venture capital,
Okay.
like for example seed, let's say.
Perfect.
Seed or pre-seed.
You want to start?
We do pre-seed and seed. I personally think there's a lot of values that comes with institutional capital and institutional money. I think institutional money much more disciplined. I do think from all the companies in our portfolios that's reached unicorn status really fast and has been succeeding so far, got very successfully acquired. I think 10 out of 10, they all started with like raising your first institutional round very early. I would say in the first year or first 6 months as companies started. I do think it does give you lots of discipline in a good way. I do think it makes, like if you start with friends and family and start with safe note instead of price round, it gives you flexibility on the same time. You keep many things, including finances, disorganized and a little bit not in order. And it's at the same time, I think venture capital is much more resilient towards the turbulence, because I feel like individual investors has less, they like get much more volatile when things not gone well, and venture capitalists got used to the fact that for any tech company there is like ups and downs, and they much more open to support you in the time when you go down, as well as like they have much more incentives to attract the rest of capital or to follow on in your round. I personally think the answer is like first 6 to 12 months. Companies we work with sometimes like do it like as early like first months as they incorporated the company. But I do think it's also very good opportunity to use it for recruiting, because lots of talent that you would want to join your company from day one needs some sort of validation and needs someone to do professional diligence on your business model, on your team, on your market. And seed round or pre-seed round from venture capitalists, even if it's small amount of money, is this kind of validations that you can show to your employees. And the last thing is customers, right? Lots of, especially if you work in B2B space, lots of your customers would want to know that your solution is not going to fail, because they will spend this few weeks or few months approving acceptance of your solution inside the team, and they don't want to switch from your software somewhere else just because your company shut down. And they've seen it many times. So for them, verification from VC side is kind of like increasing the chance that you're not going to fail too soon, so they can, once they spend time doing diligence on your solutions, they can spend a few years working with your company, and they trust it more when company is venture-backed.
I don't know if you do any pre-seed, but I think from my standpoint, time at Social Capital, NFX, the way I like to think about it, not always the truth, but it's sort of when is your biggest handicap, the amount of people you have on your team. I know a lot of early stage founders who end up spending a lot of time staring at their computer and like they're working, but they're waiting to hear back from people. They're not technical. If you need to hire technical people or you need to outsource, if you need capital to grow your team because the limiting factor to your growth and your progress is people, I think it's a great time to raise. That said, I think there's people who get very far bootstrapping. And a lot of the time that's because there's a technical co-founder and maybe a business, or the technical co-founder starts selling. But there's a lot of people I've met and seen, especially I just graduated from business school, who just sit around. And like they think they need the money to grow. And it's like, well, actually, if you just spent more time building yourself, you wouldn't need that money. And you wouldn't need the team. But like if you actually got your hands dirty, like that's not what's limiting you right now. Right now, what's limiting you is finding customers. And I think if you're a founder who's not selling, and the reason you're not selling is because you're so busy coding, but no one's using your product, like then maybe you need some money to hire a salesperson or hire a co-founder, find a co-founder. And so I think sort of what Masha is saying is like very early on, you see highly successful companies raise money because what's handicapping them from growing is their team because they're a highly efficient team already. And I think VCs can kind of tell how efficient you are with your own money and how efficient you're going to be with theirs. Any other questions? No. Do you have any last words of wisdom for Romanian entrepreneurs? Or there's other entrepreneurs in the audience. But.
I mean, you know, it's quite an interesting time for Romania, obviously. Given all we've seen in those 2 days, how dynamic the ecosystem is right now, and there's a lot to build right now. In fact, it's a region, it's changing a lot. There's a lot of interest for the technologies coming here. There's amazing engineers, as you know, as has been pointed out. The market is growing, there's some kind of economic development happening, obviously. In the regions, more integration towards, I would say, the rest of Europe, the US and so on. Maybe Israel, as we've just seen in the talk before. It's a great time to start companies. Obviously, to build an ecosystem, the main issue is to have, you know, some kind of circulation of capital, which is investment are coming, engineers are here to build it. You're gonna have some commercial traction, but then the last missing piece, the important one, is the ability to exit the companies. And so you need to develop like very strong ties with international buyers or local buyers. If it's local buyers, then you have some kind of ceiling because they cannot pay as much as US big firms would be paying for. And so I think from what we've seen, especially in Western European markets, the last part of it was not fully understood in terms of, you know, the exit opportunities. What makes an ecosystem dynamic is, I believe, in my opinion at least, when you do have strong exit opportunities and a lot of exits happening. Doesn't have to be, you know, companies bought for $1 billion, you know, hundreds of millions or whatever. You just need to have the ability for funds to have some good returns and for entrepreneurs to make, you know, interesting exits, to reinvest capital and build a successful and sustainable ecosystem. So I think this is, like, in my opinion today, the biggest challenge of ecosystems like Romania, who are, like, you know, growing quite fast, but still have to prove that they can be sustainable.
I think focusing on your advantages is very important as you're building something, and I think Romania already has, since many years, has a great reputation as a place that breeds lots of excellent talent. And I think you already have a very, very, very strong branding and very strong reputation in international tech community. And I would just focus on your strengths and offer something to international environment that you're better than the rest. And I think there is like second thing, one of the things that's some strong technical people that's been struggling with, they're just like too much focused on local customers and too much focused on local ecosystem. And while you have an advantage of, keep an advantage of having access to very strong technical talent locally, I do think you should always like have global perspective and always be in touch with like international trends and with all development that's happening right now in the field. And right now I feel like with things like Twitter or Hacker News, TechCrunch, with huge amount of the different conferences that's running like around US and Europe, there is really very many easy ways to stay in touch with international trends. So I do think it's really important to track everything that's happening on international level and to keep this perspective and build connections with people from outside. For example, we've been here on the conference for the last 48 hours, and it's very, very often like you come to the place and people like try to contact you and just like take as many meetings as you can. And I had like maybe like 1 or 2 people contacting you here. I do think just being like very proactive and thinking through who you can partner with, using any opportunity, and being like very clear about what you can offer to this partner, doing like your homework and suggesting some ways which could be like a first collaboration and which could be first exchange is really important. I think that's like what makes entrepreneurs entrepreneur.
Thank you. Just to really quickly wrap up, I think what I've been hearing from the two of you over the last 30 minutes is that to expand internationally, it's about your people. And we heard a great story about how the wrong person can jeopardize a successful business, and your product, which is the core of investing. Is a lot of people have their 3 Ps or their few words. I think for me, it's people, product, and market. All of them are dynamic, and I think, as we just heard, I mean, it's a really interesting and exciting time. And hopefully, the 3 of us, you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us after. But excited to be part of this ecosystem and really grateful to the team for putting this together. So thank you very much.